Hello, Wonderhussy here, just driving through the middle of the desert. And when I say desert, boy do I mean desert. This is even more deserty than the kind of desert I normally roll around in. Know what I mean? This is the kind of desert with just soft blow sand. In fact, there ain't nothing but sand dunes as far as the eye can see. And we've got another beautiful desert sunset on the way. But before we get to enjoy that fabulous celestial show, there's just enough daylight left for one more adventure. Now you might be saying to yourself, well, gee, Wonderhussy, what are you gonna do way out here in the middle of these sand dunes? There ain't nothing out here. Well, other than sand and sagebrush and a pile of old tires. Actually, these tires don't even look that old. I mean, dang, this still has plenty of tread on it. And look at these ones. Look at the tread on that. These are not cheap tires, am I right? I don't know, maybe they are cheap tires. What does it say? Super Swamper. TSL. Thornbird. I don't know tires that well, but I mean, these are like brand new. I just can't imagine why somebody would have gone through the trouble to drive all the way out here and dump these brand new tires out in the middle of these sand dunes. I mean, look at this one. That's a pretty nice tire too, right? Groundhog? Anyway, as baffling as the mystery of this pile of like new tires in the middle of these sand dunes is, that's not why I'm out here. I'm out here because I spotted something very interesting up ahead. Out in the middle of nowhere, in this sandy wash, there's an old abandoned house, just waiting for some inquisitive, nay, nosy and fanciful YouTuber to go poke around and make up a story about what might have happened to the people who lived there. Okay, let me make sure I locked my car. You know, whoever stole all those tires might still be in the neighborhood. But in the meantime, I'm just gonna shimmy down these sand dunes, down into the wash, and take a quick gander at this fantastic desert house for sale. Actually, I don't know if it's for sale. In fact, I doubt it's for sale. I haven't seen any private property signs, so this is probably BLM land that we're on. But it would be fun to pretend that this was one of those HGTV shows, you know? What do they have? Love it or list it, fix it or flip it. You know, they've got all those cheesy TV shows. Well, I'm going to start my own TV show. Lifestyles of the Broke and Busted. That's just a working title, but you know what I mean. Okay, daylight is a fading fast, so I'd better go see what's inside this house while we still have enough light to see what we're dealing with. I mean, upon first glance, it looks like it was an old farmhouse. And that might sound absolutely bat-shit crazy to you, to be farming in the middle of the Mojave Desert. But this is actually a part of the desert where there's a lot of underground water. There's some kind of giant aquifer, and they actually grow crops. As a matter of fact, I just drove past, you know, those big circular crop fields with the pivot sprinkler system. They're still growing alfalfa and who knows, cotton, pistachios. They grow a lot of pistachios out here. So there was and is a lot of farming in this area. And so the thought of some industrious, you know, Midwesterner who moved out here to strike it rich in the West, you know, maybe he didn't do so good at his mining or his prospecting, but he decided to just settle down and have a little farm. Well, that's not such a crazy idea when you think about all the water here. Wow, look how deep this sand, it's piled all the way up. This is the window, just FYI. Oh gosh, and then it just continues right on into the house. Golly, I'll just walk right through the window. Why not? But it's weird because now we're standing up and my head is at ceiling level. You know, I'm only 5'3". I shouldn't be bonking my head on the ceiling like this. Someone really needs to get in here with a dust buster. Boy, this also reminds me of some houses I went in once in Cantil, California. Not too far from here, but same kind of deal. There was a bunch of houses out there. They all got abandoned and now they're full of sand. Wow, I mean, you can't even, I was gonna say, you can't even really figure out what the floor plan of this house was. Everything is so clogged with sand. Boy, next time I say my house is dirty, I'm gonna think of this place. And then look at the size of these tumbleweeds all around it. This is what a tumbleweed looks like before it breaks loose and becomes a tumbleweed. It's a big ol' jumble of real nasty. In fact, I probably shouldn't have even done that with my toe. These little thorny things, they'll work their way right through the sole of your shoe. Can't remember exactly what they're called, but well, you can see right here. Here's one of them that broke loose and became a tumbleweed. Whew. Oh, dang. I guess it's still attached a little bit. Man, I was hoping it would just roll off across the desert so I could go, see them tumbling down, pledging their love to the ground. Lonely but free I'll be found, drifting along with the tumbling tumbleweeds. Totally my theme song, if I didn't already have a theme song. Anyway, let's go around the front of this house, which, oh, sadly, the front is missing, but oh my golly. I mean, you got really gonna have to use your imagination for this, but this was probably a really cool house. It had several rooms, probably had a real nice, you know, workshop, mechanic area. This looks like it might have been some kind of little courtyard in the middle, maybe like a front porch. And if you were to sit here on your front porch, well, your view would be pretty spectacular. Oh, well, hold on a minute. That's the chimney, the fireplace. Maybe this was just the living room. Well, either way, whether it was enclosed or not, this is the view you would have. Nothing but miles and miles and miles of pure, pristine desert. Okay, I can see one or two houses over there, but, you know, those would have been your closest neighbors, and they probably weren't even there back in the day. Back in the day, you probably wouldn't have seen any other houses, and you certainly wouldn't have seen those power lines. But even now, today, in 2024, despite all the hustle and bustle and craziness around us, I mean, Interstate 15 is, I think I can actually hear it very faintly in the distance, so it's probably only a few miles that way. And then the seething, teeming, writhing insanity of Las Vegas is only an hour or two that way. You wouldn't know any of that existed just standing here right now. It's amazing. It really does feel like we could be back in time 100 years ago. If it wasn't for those power lines, that is. Hey, look at this. I just noticed all over the sand, there's little tiny footprints. Look at that. Looks like the coyotes come running around here. Aren't those... Well, I don't know. Are those coyote paw prints? I'm not too good at my tracking skills. I thought like a coyote looked more like a dog. Maybe it's a jackalope. Anyway, that's pretty much all there is to say about this lonely, sand-filled desert homestead. I just thought it was worth stopping at because it's visually so striking. I mean, you can tell how old it is by the way, you know, they used to do those wood slats like that. And then look at the stucco. This is interesting. You can still see the old chicken wire and the stucco hanging onto it for dear life, and then just like little chunks of it hanging on here and there. It almost looks like, you know, Christmas ornaments or something. Oh, hey, speaking of decorations, look, it's one of those antenna balls from a Unocal 76 station, but it's completely eaten away by the desert. I guess I'll just put it right back where I found it. I mean, it's a fine line between being ethical and trying to pick up litter, you know? Anyway, I guess I'm gonna head back to my car by way of these remnants of maybe what was another building. Oh, hey, dang, look. There's another footprint, and that ain't my foot. That's my footprint. Somebody else has been here recently. Somebody wearing Keds. Ooh, it's kind of spooky. It's like exploring in the snow. You can see the footprints of the people who have been there before you. Yikes. Maybe that's the person who stole those tires. Some guy wearing Keds. I don't know. Keds don't seem like the brand of footwear of choice of a tire thief. But I guess you never know. Anyway, I said this was going to be a TV show called Lifestyles of the Broke and Busted. So as I walk back to my car, well, I guess I better paint a pretty picture of what all happened here. I'm going to go ahead and say it was a farmer. Oh, you know what it was? I'll bet you anything. It was the Dust Bowl in Oklahoma. It was some Okies. Okay, we'll say it was Fred and Velma and their kids, Scooby and Shaggy. No, it was Fred and Velma and their children, Marianne, Fred Jr., and little Janie. Well, the farm got dusted out in Oklahoma, and so they had to head west looking for a new life. And they heard about how the living was good in California, and so they loaded all their possessions into the back of their Model T. They strapped a mattress on the back. The kids rode in the back on top of the mattress, and they putted their way out to California. And then when they got here, they built a farm. See, they didn't realize, Fred and Velma didn't realize if they would have just gone a little bit farther into California, the living might have been a little bit easier. You know, if they'd gone into that lush Central Valley where, you know, the soil is rich and loamy and you can grow anything you want all year long, well, they might have made something of themselves. Unfortunately, they got here and decided to stop right in the middle of the Mojave Desert. But the desert didn't bother Fred none. No, sir, he was what you would call an industrious type. He set about building a house, and, well, first he tried his hand at prospecting, and that didn't do too good. And then he tried his hand at mining, and that didn't go so good. So then he built this farmhouse and decided to just raise tumbleweed. Okay, back in those days, tumbleweed had a number of industrial uses, including mattress padding and tire packing and bandage dressing and I'm just making this up. I don't know. I don't know what he grew, but it probably wasn't a very prosperous farm. And so unfortunately, Fred left one dust bowl for another. And what happened to the kids, you ask? What about Fred Jr. and Mary Ann and little Janie? Well, I'm glad you asked. Fred and Velma lived out their days here. You know, they had already moved once. They weren't going to pack everything up and move again. So even though the whole dang house was constantly full of sand and Velma had to sweep 10 times a day, Fred was sitting pretty because remember how the federal government started handing out all that money? Oh dear. Boy, look at the tracks here. That looks like a chicken foot. I hate to see the size of whatever that was. Some kind of bird, I guess. Oh, you know what? Maybe we're looking at a crime scene. That could have been a bird of prey that landed, and then there was a little scuffle here, you can see. And then some poor little critter got picked up and swooped into the sky to feed a bunch of baby hawks. How about that? Well, that's the way nature is. It's kind of brutal. Anyway, back to my story. Fred and Velma were sucking off the government teat for the rest of their lives. They were getting Social Security or whatever kind of farm aid they used to dole out back then. And so they lived, let's see, the Dust Bowl was like the 30s. They lived well into the 1960s, even 70s. I'm going to say they died in the 1970s. Matter of fact, Fred passed away first, as is often the case. Velma continued living out here. But her kids were like, Mom, you can't be out here in the middle of this sand dune field. She's still having to sweep 10 times a day. You need to move to the big city. So they moved their mom into a nice, comfortable home in Barstow, where she lived out the rest of her days, and maybe she died in the 1980s. But as for the kids, well, the kids, they weren't going to settle for living out here. No, sir. As soon as they could, they got outski. Let's say that Mary Ann, you know, the oldest, she was a industrious girl. She inherited her father's sense of industriousness, and as the oldest, you know, she always had to take care of the younger kids, so do the cooking, the cleaning. She was used to that kind of thing. So she went to college, and back then, you know, secretarial school. She went to college basically just to get an MRS, aka got married. So she went off and moved to, oh, we'll say she moved to sunny Los Angeles. In fact, let's say her husband was in the aerospace industry, so they moved to Hawthorne, California, where they raised a fine family of boys who enjoyed singing in their bedroom. And that one of those little boys, actually three of those little boys, ended up starting a band called the Beach Boys. How about that? Did you realize Brian Wilson's mom grew up in a cabin out here in the middle of the desert? Of course, I'm making all this up. Please don't take any of this seriously. Okay, well, what about Fred Jr.? What happened to Fred Jr.? Well, Fred Jr., unfortunately, did not inherit his dad's sense of industriousness. In fact, he inherited his dad's sense of willingness to suck off the government teat. And so Fred, unfortunately, just was sort of a ne'er-do-well. In fact, the railroad tracks run not too far from here. The Santa Fe Railroad runs freight trains through here all the time. And, well, Fred Jr. started hanging around the rail yard, made friends with all the hobos. He'd be down there drinking and gambling. And next thing you know, he became a hobo himself, and he just rode the rails from coast to coast for 5 glorious years until, unfortunately, one night he was killed in a knife fight over a poker game in East Memphis, Arkansas. terrible ending. Okay, and what about little Janie? Well, little Janie, she didn't want to go too far afield, but you know, the big city of Las Vegas was right down the road there, and say they moved here in the 30s. Little Janie was just a tot 3 years old. Oh, by the 1960s, you know, she was a fully formed woman, and she thought, well, I'm going to go to Las Vegas and make something of myself. I'm going to go to Vegas and be one of them dancing girls. And so she did. She moved to Vegas, and she got a job at a topless review, topless cabaret. Back in those days, you know, they had all those topless shows. It wasn't like it was today. And so she danced for a number of dignitaries, of course, topless. And everybody loved her because she had the most beautiful boobs in the entire Mojave Desert. Well, she did that as long as she could, but you know how that goes. Gravity takes its toll. Her beautiful boobs now reached below her belly button, and she had to figure out what to do now. You know, she was broke, busted, destitute, got tired of living in the city, and so she thought to herself, maybe I ought to move back out to the old family homestead. And so she did. She moved back out here in the 1980s, and she lived in this house. It wasn't in such bad condition back then, but it was still pretty rough. She lived out here by herself for many, many years. In fact, until very recently, she was out here running a crime ring, stealing tires. Okay, now I'm just being fanciful. Let me get back in the car, because believe it or not, there's still one more thing I want to check out here while I still have daylight. Okay, I just figured that while I was in the neighborhood, I might as well drop in and pay a visit on Fred and Velma's nearest neighbors. Now, you can see Fred and Velma's neighbors were never quite as industrious as Fred and Velma. Oh, I just realized I didn't give them a last name. We'll call Fred and Velma the Dusenheimers, you know, fine German farm folk. Well, unfortunately, the neighbors were Scotch-Irish white trash by the name of Jackson, and they never could quite get it together. I mean, they were slobs. They left their shoes. Oh, hey, I got all excited and thought this was a ked. You know, like we saw those ked footprints over there. Anyway, they left their crap all over the place. They didn't build their house to last in the first place, and so consequently, it really fell apart over the years. Oh no, golly, what happened here? Okay, this is really interesting to me because this abandoned ruin looks like it's from 1865. And this shoe looks like it was from Payless Shoe Source, circa 1995. So it's like, how did it end up here? Was somebody squatting in this abandoned ruin? I mean, I can't imagine how desperate you'd have to be, or how high on the FBI's most wanted list you would have to be to hide out in a place like this. I'm gonna have to revise my chronology. Okay, so let's say the Jacksons didn't move into the neighborhood until like the 50s, 60s. In fact, maybe that's what contributed to Fred's death, you know? Fred came out here when the land was good and the desert was pure and there wasn't any of this nonsense going on, this white trash, and he had his little farmhouse. Well, then, like I said, you know, he had that view with no other houses. Well, then in the 1960s, the Jacksons rolled in and built this shanty and ruined Fred's view, and there goes the neighborhood. And next thing you know, their kids are running around stealing tires, probably working for little Janie, as a matter of fact. Anyway, let's just say the Jacksons moved here in the 60s, drove Fred to an early grave, and they were just never any good. You know, there were always every neighborhood has that one family that's always in trouble. You know, the police are always going to their house. There's always old cars on blocks in the front yard. You know the family I'm talking about. There's probably one in your neighborhood. Well, I have news for you. The Jacksons were that family in this neighborhood. They were constantly getting into trouble with the law. The sheriff was out here more often than not. And, well, what did I say their name was? Oh God, I already forgot. The Dusenheimers. I gotta keep my own story straight. The Dusenheimers would never let their kids play with the Jackson kids, which, chronology-wise, I guess that wouldn't make sense anyways. Well, say when you know, Marianne, the eldest, the daughter who made something of herself, she would come visit with her grandkids. Well, they would never let the grandkids come over here. Even though, you know, the Jackson kids, they had all the coolest video games. They were allowed to smoke cigarettes and drink beer. So even though they weren't any good at farming or at building structures that would withstand the test of time, well, the Jacksons hung on here in this big, old, rambling, roadhouse-looking den of iniquity, let's just say. And you know what I mean by a den of iniquity. Remember that one kid that your parents weren't too crazy about you hanging out at their house, but you loved going over to their house because Their parents didn't have a curfew for them. You could stay out as late as you wanted to. You didn't have to go to bed at any time. You could watch any program on TV. You could help yourself to anything in the liquor cabinet just so long as you topped it back off with water. Oh, remember that trick? Anyway, all of that describes what life was like in the Jackson household to a T. But, you know, joking aside, it was actually a pretty nice house, you know? Same kind of stucco facade with this cool rock bottom. Probably had a real nice porch out front where they were all sit and drink beer and take pot shots at the sheriff as he came up the driveway. You know, those kind of folk. In fact, the front yard was probably full. Busted, rusted old cars. There was probably a Harley Davidson motorcycle or 3 out front. Matter of fact, I'll bet you anything, the Jacksons were affiliated with the Hells Angels. This was probably an unofficial Hells Angels clubhouse. So you tell me, if you're a Dusenheimer, wouldn't you rather be hanging out over here at the Jacksons? I mean, look, they even have a bar. Actually, I guess this was the kitchen. Oh my goodness. This is sad, but also really gross. I mean, look at this soggy shag carpeting. This, I don't want to touch it, but I'm pretty sure that this is carpet because you can see where it's coming loose. Oh, it's so covered in mud that it's hard to tell. And then you want to hear something sad. Look at this. Michelle, please call. Oh, and then it says real faint at the bottom, your father. Oh my gosh, Michelle, please call your father. Golly, I wonder what happened to Michelle. Little Michelle Jackson, you know? She couldn't help the kind of family she was born into. Let's say Michelle came of age back in the 1980s, right around the time this place was really starting to get a notorious reputation. And, you know, every time Marianne's grandkids would come visit, they wouldn't let the kids play with little Michelle. Michelle was just trying to find a good role model. You know, she would, in fact, Michelle would make the hike over there. Oh, did I say Fred and Velma had already moved by then? No, but you know who had moved in by then was Janie. Remember after Janie got too old to be a showgirl, she moved out there. So little Michelle would go hang out with Janie. You know, she was looking for a mentor. But Janie, unfortunately, was not the kind of mentor you want for a little girl. Because remember, she fell into a bad crowd, you know, stealing tires and whatnot. So Michelle picked up some bad habits, unfortunately. And not just from Janie. I mean, there was bikers hanging out here at the old Jackson place. Matter of fact, I'd go so far as to say Janie probably made amends with the Jackson when she moved back, and she was probably friends with the Jacksons. Matter of fact, I'll bet you anything, Janie used to come party over here. Nothing like a washed-up stripper in a biker bar. You know what I mean? And okay, it's not exactly a biker bar, but it was, you know, a biker hangout, close enough. Wow, this was a big house. I can see there being room for all of the Hells Angels and the Vagos. Isn't that the rival motorcycle club that the Hells Angels hate? I think that's how you pronounce it. V-A-G-O-S, Vagos. Well, there'd be room for both of them in here, and plenty of room so that they wouldn't even step on each other's toes. So anyway, what happened to Michelle Jackson? Why did it say, Michelle, please call your father? Well, Michelle always was kind of a daddy's girl. You know, say what you will about the Jacksons. They did have good hearts, and they did love their kids, even though they didn't exactly, you know, make them do their homework or, you know, make sure they brush their teeth or anything like that. But Michelle did all right, you know, with Janie's mentorship. She ended up becoming a dancing girl all on her own. She moved to Vegas. No, matter of fact, Michelle never even made it to Vegas. She went to Barstow. She was a dancing girl in Barstow. And all those guys from Fort Irwin used to come out and stick dollars in her G-string. And she did all right. In fact, she did so well that she decided to move on up to Hollywood. Okay, she wasn't going to mess around with Vegas. She saw what Vegas had done to Janie. Vegas chewed and spit poor Janie up and out. So instead, Michelle decided to go to Hollywood, and she ended up working at Jumbo's Clown Room. Okay, you ever heard of Jumbo's Clown Room? It's a strip club in Hollywood, I think, or North Hollywood, that I think it's sort of jokingly known for having ugly strippers. Apologies if you work there and that's not the case. That was just my understanding of it. Maybe it just has a sense of humor and you can have any kind of haircut you want or whatever. You know, not the typical blonde, big-breasted strippers. It sounds like a fun place, and I definitely want to go check it out sometime. But that's where Michelle Jackson ended up working. She worked at Jumbo's Clown Room for many, many years. But, you know, like I said, gravity takes its toll, and sure, you can milk a few more years out of it at a place like Jumbo's. But eventually, she did have to retire. Uh-oh. Ooh, I just noticed there's this creepy underground bunker. It's getting dark. Should I go in? I think we all know the answer to that. Let's see what's in this bunker. Could this be where Michelle Jackson ended up? Did things not go well for her? in Hollywood, so she had to move back to the desert and live in an underground bunker. Wow, look at this. It's a round, I don't know if you can see, the light's very dim in here, but it's almost like a cross-section of a metal, oh, it's like a metal tank, like a water tank. I don't know if you can tell because it's real dark down here, but I guess it's a tank buried in the ground, and whoever was living here, well, I was going to say they were using it for food storage, but maybe not because there's a couch down here. Golly, maybe Michelle did end up having to come back here and live in this underground bunker. I'll bet you anything that's exactly what happened, okay? She worked at Jumbo's. She got mixed up in a bad crowd in LA. You know, she already had her biker connections, and they told her, you know, honey, you're moving to the big city. If you ever need any help at all, just call the Hells Angels and we'll be there for you. And so next thing you know, she's hanging out with bikers. She got into meth, got into some bad situations, met some sketchy people, and she did. She had to hightail it back to the desert with her boyfriend. Let's say she was dating a biker named Stoney, and they were, oh, say they were selling meth. After she couldn't make money at Jumbo's clown room anymore. I'm just gonna step over here where it's lighter. After she couldn't make money dancing anymore, you know, they were broke. She still had to make an income, and she couldn't just live off the government teat like old Fred Dusenheimer over there, you know? Nowadays, they want more proof. You gotta prove that you're going into the unemployment office every week looking for a job. You know, she didn't have time for any of that. Neither one of them did. So they were selling meth, and they had a deal with these cartel dudes that went bad. And so they had to come out here and hide out in the desert. Michelle said, hey, I've got the perfect place we can hide out. My family used to live out on this farm out in the desert, and there was this bunker out in the back that who knows who originally built this. Maybe it was built during the Cold War, you know, because they were afraid of the Ruskies, or maybe it was just a, what do you call it, root cellar kind of a situation. Whatever, Michelle knew immediately it would be the place to go, because when they were kids, this was like the clubhouse where the kids always used to hang out and play. Like, you know, the adults are up there playing strip poker, bikers. You know, Michelle and the kids were down here playing doctor, and that's why the Dusenheimer grandkids weren't allowed to come over here. But anyway, Michelle remembered that this bunker was here, and so Stoney and Michelle came back out and hid down here for months. Anyway, I'm not actually sure what ever became of Michelle and Stoney. I mean, maybe the cartel did track them down here. Even way out here in the middle of nowhere, hiding in this underground bunker. The cartel knows. And so maybe they ended up being murdered by the cartel. Or maybe the cartel just drove around in circles looking and looking and looking and never could find them because they were 6 feet underground in the middle of nowhere. In fact, I like a happy ending, so I'm gonna go with that scenario. The cartel gave up looking for them, but they weren't taking any chances. You know, once they felt like the coast was clear, they emerged from their bunker and they hightailed it to Belize, where they're still living happily to this day, drinking Coronas with lime wedges and margaritas on the beach every dang day. Let's just say they saved up enough money from their meth dealing to finance a happy retirement. And as to why it says, Michelle, please call your father, well, that dates from Michelle's Jumbo's clown room days. You know, she was out there living the high life, partying in the Hollywood Hills, or if not the Hollywood Hills, at least the North Hollywood apartment complexes. And her dad was worried about her. Remember, she was a daddy's girl. You know, never got on too good with her mom. They were always fighting. But her dad loved her, and he was worried about her. And then her mom passed away relatively young. So her dad was kind of hanging on out here, but he didn't know what happened to his daughter. He didn't want to leave without knowing how to get a hold of his daughter to tell her where he was going. So he waited here for years for Michelle to come back. And he didn't want to live out here anymore now that his wife was dead, all the bikers had dispersed. There was nothing out here. The place was a mess. It's hard to maintain. There's sand blowing in every crevice. I mean, just ask Velma Dusenheimer. So finally one day he had enough. He knew he had to move because by then, let's say he had real bad gout. And he never did suckle off the government teat, but it was finally time for him to go into the city of Barstow and get government assistance and live in a home. And so his last act before abandoning the family homestead was to leave a message for his long-lost daughter in case she ever came back home. And the sad irony in all of this is, all that time Michelle was living in that bunker out back, she never saw the writing on the wall. You know, her and Stoney were in such a hurry to get down in the bunker and hide, they didn't bother to go in the house and read anything written on the walls. So Michelle never knew that her dad was looking for her. And unfortunately, well, he's still in a retirement home in Barstow to this day. So Michelle Jackson, if you happen to be watching this video, call your father. Okay, it's getting real dark and my sister just texted me, so I'd better get back in my car and get started on my way home. But I sure hope you enjoyed the history of these abandoned homesteads. Remember, I can't say for sure that any of this actually happened. It's just a theory.